Okay, we're going to call the East Lansing City Charter Review Committee to order. My apologies for starting it a little late. This is for the December 5th, 2024 meeting. Major, if you can have the roll call, please.
Ryan Medeiros,
Present.
Jeffrey Hayes,
Present.
Jonathan Foreman, Ruben Martina, Bill Rhodey here, Kim Wild
Here.
Veronica Wilkerson Johnson,
Present.
Dale Rudolph, Lynn Richardson, present.
Okay, thank you, Ava. All right, we're going to have approval of the agenda tonight. We do have a quorum, so we're okay there. Approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Move it.
By Pam, supported by Veronica. Any additions or corrections to this? No. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Next, we have approval of the minutes from the November 21st, 2024 meeting. I'll move approval of those. Is there support?
Second.
Supported by Veronica. Any changes to the minutes? Anyone found? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. Okay, we moved on to communications 2.1. We saw a huge packet in our communications. And anything else that anybody else wants to add? All right, then we'll move to 2.2, communications from the audience. Anyone want to speak? Now, we do have a public hearing, I think, so if there's something that you want to say during that time or this time, whichever way you want to go first. All right, nobody's here, so we'll just pass on that. And communication from committee members. Anybody have anything that they want to put out there? Okay. So we'll go to our public hearing. We talked about having 5 different times when we would have, for the benefit of those that are watching this tape of this meeting. We talked about having 5 different meetings where citizens could come and talk to us, tell us what was on their mind about the charter, or some specific things that they had noticed that we had done. I don't see anyone that wants to speak during this time. Make sure you don't want to speak. Okay. We have a guest here, but doesn't want to come forward to say anything. So I'm just going to give a summary of where we're at so that people watching will have an idea. We started, the committee started meeting in August, and including today, you will have 7 times, with 1 meeting advertised as a public hearing type of meeting, along with tonight, where community members are encouraged to come and tell us their thoughts or concerns. Mr. Bellman also announced that at the last city council meeting that we were having this meeting tonight for citizen input as well. We've gone through almost 7 chapters out of 20 and are close to being on schedule. At this time, we are only proposing 1 amendment to the charter, and that is in chapter 4, section 8, which clarifies when they create a committee for a specific purpose and with a specific time duration. Because in the charter, it says you can't have any standing committees of council. And we wanted to make sure it was clarified what committee that was formed at council would be. And examples of those committees are when they're naming a park or something like that. They put together a committee to look at the information and get back to council.
Temporary.
So we just clarified the language in that as a proposal to council for a charter change. However, we also had recommended clarifications on when our new council members take office. It's always been one of these difficult things because the election day is a different day every time, and depending on what's going on, we waited for a canvass before we have seated our new council members. Chapter 3.6 and 4.4. We had thought we came to a conclusion, but as we'll talk about later, and put it on our meeting for our next meeting. House Bill 5700 passed at the State House that anyone who's elected after this December 2024 is going to have to take office after the first of the month following the election. So the earliest someone could take office in East Lansing by the Home Rules Act, the Home Rule City Act, which we must follow, would be the first meeting in December as city council. So that's very different from what we've had before, but we'll have to go back over those two chapters because that just came to light. So you'll see many proposed resolutions on our agenda tonight. These are samples of our work and they can be modified yet tonight, but it'll give you an idea of the types of changes we may be looking at. And our committee wants the charter to be easy to read and understood and also be current with today's use of technology and practices within the city operations. So it also must be compliant with state rules too that we have to follow. So, and as for proposal 1, it passed. And at this time, we haven't discussed where specifically it will be, and we'll work with our city attorney on getting that into the charter and getting that as an addition. So just a reminder, committee doesn't enforce anything in the charter. We leave that to our city manager and council to oversee, and specifics on how things operate according to the charter will be in ordinances and resolutions, neither of which this committee will be part of. So with that, will be the summary. And Pam, one of our committee members, would like to speak.
I have a question about the kind of thing that you described, the state law changes. How does, does the council recommend a charter change? Pretend this committee wasn't happening. Is that, again, that goes in front of the council?
So it can happen a couple of ways. It depends whether it's the type of state law change that would create a standard that preempts local ordinance, which would then require a charter amendment, which we would then say, okay, we need to repeal that entire section because now state law controls when council members take office, for example. However, if it only puts some, parameters on when they take office, then we would need to amend it to be consistent with that section. But the council can do that at any time by resolution to put it on the next general election.
But it would go in front of voters, even if it's a state mandated change to align with state law.
Yeah, it would, with the alternative being that we have a vestigial piece of the charter that is still in place, inaccurate and ineffective.
Or does anyone else want to add anything to that summary? Everybody can see their names in front of our committee here and on the website. We have lots of things on the website, our meetings, our minutes, names, things about us. So feel free to investigate under the city charter. It's right there on the front page. So I guess we'll move on to item number 4, new business. And these are all those changes that we left for our attorney, Mr. Chubb, to do. In his absence last time, we gave him a lot of homework. So we're going to start with 2.2. He's added the additional language that we talk about each time. Anybody have any additions to this or concerns about this?
I just want to remind everyone, again, I'm just acting as the scrivener when I put this down. I'm not trying to implement policy or impact what the intent is of the group. Again, I wasn't here. I did have copious notes from my partner, but it could be inaccurate. So of course, this is nothing. If this is not exactly what you want, we need to fix that.
Well, everybody sees that this is consistent with what we've been talking about, then I would need a motion to approve the change to chapter 2.2 of additional language. Moved by Pam Wild, supported by, I support Dr. Veronica Wilkerson Johnson. Any more discussion on this? All those in favor say aye. 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 All those opposed, same sign. Another amendment proposed.
She had a bell tonight.
That's kind of cute. I just want to take a point of personal privilege. Thank you, Asia, for the detailed minutes. Those were very good.
They really were good.
Oh, yes. When I looked through those, I thought I'd have to look at my notes, but your notes were even better. So thank you. Okay, next one is section 4.7. Talking about this for a while. So how does this look to our the clerk, the designee, and also to be posted on the city's website? In it's 4.7F. I'll start for those watching. 4.7A, we deleted in A the last sentence because the council looks at holidays when they set their schedule, so there's no need to have that in the charter. And on F, we've added that the minutes will be kept by kept and signed by the clerk or their designee. And they also should be posted on the city's website. So we wanted to make sure people had easy access electronically if they so desire, but also that the clerk is totally responsible that because those jobs can be designated to assist. Yes.
I think it's, so I went through and looked at document location references, and there's a bunch of assorted ones. And I wonder if we wouldn't want to just have a standard, and I would suggest available to members of the public for review at City Hall, the city library during business hours, and the city website. And how that could be actually implemented, we talked a little bit about this last meeting, is computers are available at the library, they can go to the city website. If we had a computer available for people at the city hall, but to say explicitly where the data is available seems to me to be a transparency issue. So we've got a few. One says at the discretion of the city manager with a new one, another, there, why not just they all go to the same place, which can kind of be the city website, and then that you can get to without a computer, you can get to with the help of a librarian, and you know, unless there's a reason why some of them should be available in different ways.
So Pam, on this one, I don't see on 4.7 where it says they should also be, the last sentence says they will have the minutes and records.
So I'm just saying we've got a copy of opinions should be available for review the Putting City Hall Library. Then we also have the city's website. And
Can you refer which?
oh, okay. So I'm just saying like 7.6 has a copy of opinion shall be available for review of the public or City Hall and City Library. We've got 6.5, which says on the city website by means deemed by the city manager. We've got the 4.7 records of regular meetings, counts during business hours. There's just a lot of different verbiages around data availability. And it just seems like it might be easier if they were just all the same.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you want to have is, it's another consistency.
Yes. Yeah.
Like we've done. So maybe Mr. Chubb could make arrangements to sort of track some of those availability issues like we've done with some of the others.
Yeah. And just have the same standard wording. So it would be the same wording for anything that's going in front of the public. Here's
That
where
makes sense.
Did we talk about adding an example? Kind of an
We're still
understanding, that
Yeah.
whenever there's discussion about availability resources, that it would be.
oh, but yes, the preamble, all city data, public data will be available. That's a good point too. That could go. Yeah. Ease of access too. So I don't have to pester Mr. City Manager to find the data. So, you know.
Okay, so we either can, we talked about having consistent, taking the he's and she's and making it persons and throughout the charter. So that's one consistency. We also talked about, now we're talking about having the 3 places. That's a good thing. And so, and then the third thing, which Mr. Bellman just pointed out, is in F. We're taking English off the language later on one of ours. So we should just say the language which the term of its proceedings in the language which it did.
Occur.
Is what you put
there. Yep.
So that could be the 3 consistencies. So what would you want to do with 4.7? Would you want to pull that out at any time you have inconsistencies with this, or just in the second F, the second line. Because later on one of our resolutions, it has the exact language for that. Do we stop approving these and get them all that way, or how would you like to take that?
Yeah.
I want to see it.
Yeah, I think we should probably, but I want to make sure, so if we use 4.7, 4.7F is the model, and where we say, we're referencing these documents and we say any person shall have access to the minutes and records of all regular and special meetings of the city council during business hours. And they shall also be posted to the city website. Let's make sure we get this to be exactly what we want to be transferred over to the others. So if you have my hearing, it's going to say, yeah, so it's any person shall have access to the minutes and records of all regular and special meetings of the council during business hours at City Hall.
Well, currently it says at City Hall and the city library during business hours and on the city website. That's what we got one version.
That's another section.
So that's a different section, yes, so 4.7. What do we want this to say exactly? I think Mark has an idea on that.
No, I don't have an idea on that. I would just note that this whole section is about the authority of the city council. And that last sentence in F is about record keeping and availability to the public, something that isn't about the authority of the council, it's about the public's ability to get something signed. I would suggest that we think about taking that sentence out and putting it in another location where we would target the idea of public accessibility to records, information relating to activities. So just an idea, just about.
But isn't this, this is talking about the creation of the information and the publishing of that information.
Well,
So you're saying
the
that,
council has a duty to have minutes and have minutes available to the public. But this talks about how the public will have access to those minutes, which I think can be the different section.
perhaps
Might
create,
target that.
Yeah, that's where the preamble.
so
I wouldn't put
have
that
to
in
be
preamble.
redundant.
About. You don't have to be redundant about repeating it, you know.
Right.
Right, over and over again.
Right. Well, a preamble is more like an aspirational statement of like the goals of the city, what people think, like, well, I think maybe what Mark's saying by that, this would be, we have just a whole different section added, which could cover all these separate sections we have about access to documents.
Right.
That's not what a preamble type. The preamble is like, okay, everybody's entitled to equal rights and stuff, not like, where we grab business records in the city. Just-
right.
Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the identification of the individual perhaps within the organization who is responsible for making that happen, probably the clerk. Maybe it's better under the clerk's location.
Everybody point to city bank, that's his problem. So.
He points at city council, so that's.
So I hear what you're, definitely hear what you're saying about repeated verbiage, and it's kind of a long sentence. But I do think that where the information, none of this means anything if the public can't get at it. If citizens don't have access to this, it's meaningless. So if I just imagine I'm pouring through all these and then I get to this and then I'm like, there'd have to be a real explicit direction to, okay, where can I find it?
Where can you find the minutes?
Well, no, so yeah, so I'm like, oh, I'm gonna find them here, looking for the minutes, are they publishing the minutes, and then where are they?
So
I think Mark was proposing is that we just add a section, maybe just to either wherever we think it might fit to the city clerk or to the city manager and say that all of this government records and anything you want to find is available, all the minutes and records of the special meetings of the regular meetings of the council, anything else that we find that we want, it should be made accessible and transparent to the public. Let's carve that, make that a new maybe subsection under the city clerk or the city manager's thing and drop out this particular you know,
Exactly where it is,
Language.
over and over again.
over. and over
Sometimes
again.
in two places the same.
Right, and that makes sense. I mean, then somebody can just go say, okay, this is part of what we think you should be able to, should be maintained at the clerk's office.
Maybe there could be some reference that, to that section or location of the information is 3.6 or something, so, because we are talking about generating data in these.
Well, since 1948 or whatever, we had our first one of these. You know, we don't really have anything under chapter 8, municipal court, chapter 9 supervisors. You know, we've eliminated some elected positions. The administrative judge, for instance, was in here at one time. We probably at this point in time, because now we have electronic access, we have minutes that are kept in a different way than they were in the 40s. That we have all kinds of access that is available potentially, but we make no mention of it in this charter. And maybe access to information should be a specific section. I'm suggesting that you think about that.
And if I can just put it out there as an option, under section 5.3, other powers and responsibilities, which is under chapter 5, responsibilities and authority of the city council. If we go to 5.3, sub H, notes the council shall determine the method of publication of all notices, ordinances, and proceedings for which a mode of publication is not prescribed by this charter or by other law. That may be a place, first of all, if either we'll need to take that out if we put it somewhere else, or we could put it in this location. But just say it's an obligation of the council to ensure that the city clerk does the following.
Yes,
I was gonna say, I think that needs to be its own heading, because when I look here, if I was looking to where I find something that was buried to responsibility and authority, I would,
that's
what
my
you know.
concern.
And I almost feel like it should be the, and it could be wrong, but instead of miscellaneous, we put it at chapter 20, and whatever's in miscellaneous when we get there, we put that chapter 21, but I would like that when you get through this whole thing and you see this is for the people, the citizens, for them to be able to look at where I get information, how it's, who puts it there and everything. Then we don't have to amend each section every time. We just got it in the one section and people can identify that's where to look instead of.
That's like, we have this, I need to go to page very.
Yes.
So how would you do it if you, on the 8 and 9, which we have history there, so we have it amended, we have it repealed. How long do we have to keep historical references in our charter to know where what was changed?
You know,
I don't think there's an obligation. I think, so what we would do for those sections is we would just show a strikeout of anything that's remaining, which I don't think.
There's
Zero. Yeah, I think we accept the publication history of it. And we could rename it in the same way we're doing, but all the words be new listed.
You know, vote at some point on all the changes of gender stuff too, because I just see like 4.7G, himself, herself, there, we don't have it struck it in that, or it's not highlighted, it's just. A future meeting, there's gonna be a master list of all the changes, we'll go through them.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things, that we bring up at the end, because we wanted to see how it is different throughout. And there was some conversation about using they versus person. I think the DEI director may have had some thoughts on that as well. But yeah, that's something that I think we will need to tackle, but I think we should get through all of it to kind of know the differences as we go through. Probably inconsistent.
but I think that's relevant to this document. There may be documents that are in a different public sphere than what they're talking about too. Something of the, I don't know.
So let's just talk a minute then about what would we want? If we put it in chapter 8, we're getting rid of, if we get rid of municipal court because it's not there anymore. It's just a reference to what was there before. What would you want it to be the title so the average citizen would look at this city charter and they would say, oh, that's where I go to find out how I find information?
The word transparency.
Would you say accessibility to city documents?
Retention. record access and information.
Yeah, I think that accessibility be in that statement somewhere, you know, because it's a repository, it's access, and it's open to everyone. So accessibility, availability of documents, that type of wording, where people say, well, where do I find everything? Oh, here's something, it's a repository of everything we're looking for. This is how we find it.
Record access and transparency.
Transparency and accessibility of public records,
Okay.
something like that. What's better with the public, define what public record is, include city council meetings, minutes, permanent journal stuff, everything we talked about. Find what's included in there, how people get it, what's be published, when, where, how.
What did you use that transparency and
Transparency and accessibility of
public records?
public records,
Or should we say East Lansing?
just a thought.
Should we specifically say
City of East Lansing.
City of East Lansing public records?
Look at the table of contents now. The longest chapter heading's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. If you're not keep kind of short.
And they use city throughout this. They capitalize city through the whole thing, so probably could do that. So how does it sound like transparency and accessibility of city records? Transparency, accessibility of city records.
And transparency and resident accessibility, sorry, I'm typing in.
Yeah.
Erasing very quickly, transparency and resident accessibility to city records
No
and
residents.
information.
Just make it short as possible.
And you've heard from us that, first of all, records will be in the language. Do we want to keep in the language of the proceedings in that or not? Be kept in the language, be taking out English on one. I'm seeing a nod here.
Yeah, I thought you'd read permanent journal of its proceedings. The language which shall be approved by council, this council need to include the language for what stuff in it, or is that just so self-evident that?
No, I think,
It's that,
I feel we're still talking about the title, you know, anybody can walk into, can file a FOIA request. So, I mean, if all records are accessible, any individual who makes a request for state.
But these aren't FOIA records, these are
No,
public.
these are about keeping records. It's still, we're still controlled by FOIA, which is a state statute. To do things that are different than that.
Of course not, but then I'm saying like the point of it showing up in F is that this is where we're talking about the requirement to keep records and minutes of meetings. And so it's a natural place to say, oh, look, they're mandated to keep records of the meetings. Where are they? So if we said, you know, see section 8 or.
No, if you're putting all that into section 8, that would be based on the title, would be where people would automatically go to see what their rights are.
Right, see the
That
charter,
should be
see
that-
the ordinances.
Then they ask for something and somebody said, no, I can't give that to you, or something like that. That's where they would go, this new section 8. So it's really about not having a title that indicates anything other than it's transparent. You have access to these records, and then to flesh out section 8 with this type of language that talks about specifically where you're keeping it, how the access will be electronically, where it will be electronically, things like that.
But the stipulation in 4.7F is that there be minutes kept and the agendas, and that those be available to the public. That's right. That's what we're saying in F.
Right, but having them accessible to the public would then be an 8 for this new section, because just having minutes and an agenda is a duty of the council. That's a different duty than making it so that it says you gotta keep minutes.
Well,
You gotta have an agenda.
But currently it is part of that right here.
That's what we're talking about moving that. So
But I'm concerned that if we move it, then it doesn't become a duty of council to make them public. If we just lost that section, then you'd be like, oh, maybe they don't have to have those be public, maybe they just keep it.
We'll say in the other section that.
essentially, we'll say it's a duty.
We'll say you have to put the minute, I mean, you can define minutes.
So the other section would say, a heading for each type of document that is held, city documents that, so we'd say the minutes, it would be what, a heading with the minutes and agenda for all city meetings, a heading for charter, a heading for ordinances. See what I'm saying? Like that's,
Ordinances, resolutions, so
okay,
that
so,
if people know where to look for them, they'll be in section 8, where they can find them and that they're being kept.
but they don't have the same sentence after them with their library and city hall and online.
And so just for Tony here, one during business hours at City Hall, one at the library during business hours, and on the city's website. Those are the 3 places that. Now, being 8, we're talking about having transparency and access of public records. Is that okay for a heading?
That sounds good. And I don't think, is there any FOIA references? I don't think we're not referencing FOIA, I don't think, in the charter at this point.
No, I mean, it's a state statute.
Oh, yeah, no, I know, but we're putting the stuff out that you don't have to FOIA. That's what we're talking about, just the minutes and the agenda, things that you don't have to
Those are
FOIA.
accessible at all times because they're electronically.
Yes, and we're trying to get the explicit
Right.
nature and wording that's standardized.
It's available, as a file of extra agendas or something.
I just be careful with some of this language because not every record of the state, there are personnel
That's
decisions
what I'm saying.
that I think are not accessible. And you can't FOIA them. So I want to make sure that whatever language we would choose to incorporate in this might make it clear that the records are public records. So that we're not sort of opening up or causing a problem.
So maybe a reference where we talk about the generation of the data, like in 4F, it says that these are created as public records.
Correct.
And then where are the public records? That could be over here, but we know it's considered public record. And we know that means it's available. It was
So
explicit.
I'll make a quick suggestion. So in this new section, we just have a general statement of here are the documents, things that are public. We naturally exclude personnel records and things like that. There could be a general sentiment that we have a sunshine law or sunshine provision, for lack of a better term, that things are public unless they're excluded, should be excluded. But you can easily define, you can copy the same sentence you have there and put it in. And all the other ones too, so be very clear what's public, what's
Well,
not.
I think as Tony develops some suggested language, you guys take a look at it. If that section should clearly identify that there are certain type of confidential documents, attorney-client privilege documents, things like that, excluding those. They can have
I think
it
that's
can be a habitable section that these are excluded.
we're making it more complex than necessary.
I just think that, because the confidentiality of public records is governed by MCL 15.243, which is section 13 of the Freedom of Information Act. I think if we say something like public records of the city are available pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act. Additionally, those documents mandated for disclosure under this charter are available during business hours in City Hall, the city library, and on the city website. And I'm just like writing as fast as I can here, but that's because I completely agree with Lynn's concern that I don't think there is anything within the Freedom of Information Act that would say that those limitations on exemptions can't be widened by local law. And that's what we really need to worry about. I think that's exactly what Lynn was saying.
And I like that language. I think that covers a lot. What we're trying to achieve by our transparency concerns and also protecting those, concerns that both Mark and I are.
And this could, I think, Jeffrey was going there, where you could have preamble sentence to that to say the city is committed to transparency of its records and the available, something along those lines to give that sentiment. And then this would prescribe more the nuts and bolts.
That's fine.
Again, that's wholly at the discretion of this committee.
Like that. To go.
The point I was gonna make, all of this started around the official proceedings of city council, ordinances, and resolutions. So maybe that's the first paragraph that falls in this new section, is extracting any reference to those three items. And that starts, and then if you come across something else, that could be B in this chapter.
Yeah, that's what I think.
But we're really just talking about the official proceedings, of city council.
Right, and I feel like the charter is reminding and identifying what's public. So this 4M is saying this is public, so we are not whatever else, personnel record, no, city minutes, so as things are created, they're identified as a public record.
Are there, this question for anybody, are there public records the city has that people have a problem getting access to, FOIA, where FOIA takes too long, or it's too expensive, and the things we could provide to people that we currently don't? At Tony's point, we can broaden it. Not saying we should, I'm just curious if anyone has, is there something to identify, or is that not a?
Well, I think for one of your points, that's how long it's taking or what's there, it depends on the staffing that they have the ability and what was asked. So I don't know that we could ever prescribe something because you never know who's there to be able to carry it out in the middle of election day. Someone puts a FOIA in, it's just circumstantial. But I don't know that anything hasn't, some people have questioned whether they got the thing they asked for, but then they go back and either the city attorney says to them, that's not something that's FOIAble or not. But as far as I know, they've been given whatever they asked for.
I don't want to FOIA, so I'm Joe Q Public, I just want to say, what happened? Oh, good, I can go look at that agenda and see what they discussed or watch that little bit of footage. So FOIA, that's a whole other ball of wax. It's also scary. So I would not want to be talking about FOIA. If I'm just like a citizen going, oh, I wonder what the Parks Commission was talking about. I don't want to think, oh, I got a FOIA. No, I'm not, nobody's, so we want to make real clear what, you can just go to the library and look up. You can just, not, and then what is going to be protected, behind a FOIA request.
Is the goal, not just you, but everyone else, that public records of the city, which could or should be disclosed, should just be available to people without having to go through someone FOIA? So if you're online already, you could,
And it should be explicit, it's explicit in the charter so far. I'm seeing these are public information that's available for anybody who wants it. So let's just get that.
It's a burden on staff to have to come up with stuff. Also a burden, maybe initially to put it up, but it's less of a burden to mandate through the charter that we're going to sort of force the things to be accessible to people, certain things to be accessible to people, and that just, or no one else has to deal with it. Staff doesn't have to deal with it for it. It's just, Dan can go, just get online and find what she looks for.
I think they are. I mean, you can go and you can see you can see the minutes from way back when. You can see the video recordings,
Pretty much.
all of that.
Yeah.
So they're doing it already. It's just for Joe Q Public, or Joanne Q Public, to be able to look at, where do I find it? I don't understand the city. Where do I go to look? They start at the charter, they would see that. Yeah. So how about if we let Tony do the chapter 8, propose how that looks, and then we'll put that on our agenda for next time to look at that language. We'll put 4.7 aside. You look at apps to take that out. The same thing about that English language, which we talked about before.
Yeah.
That we talked about the language of the proceedings, is what is in one of our later resolutions here. So, okay, 4.7 we put aside. 4.8 was approved.
Can I ask a question? I don't know whether it would be Robert, but it would probably be useful to to let the charter committee know how far back they can already go. So I know that when we go on the portal, we can go back to 2019, sometime in 2019 or something, and actually watch the council working. But our archives of minutes and things like that go back further. I'm not exactly sure how far back they go. And that's always a question of having staff go back, put them in a format that can be put on the city's website. I don't know that we've gone completely
We
back.
haven't digitalized the really older ones, so maybe getting the date from the staff, from your office to find out what's the ones that are on the website and going from there.
So it goes back to 2019, for this renewal.
That's not the current one, but on the archives, I think we go back further.
I know I can watch a city council meeting in advance.
On the portal.
You have to go into that other spot to see it.
Double check.
And the minutes are there too.
And those are the kind of things that might be an exception where you go to the reference library and she says, oh, no, the online only goes back to the 19th. You're gonna have to call City Hall and it can take 5 business days. I mean, that's, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how everyone feels about the video. I don't want to refer to the video because the video isn't the official thing and it can get, like, we had a problem with the video not working the one time. And so we just talk about the journal, basically, you know, that we have the official thing that people actually put their name to, the mayor put their name to it and signed it off.
It is great to be able to see video.
I like it. It can be very spaced.
And yeah, it definitely is data. But I mean, you really get a lot more info if you watch meeting discussion from.
Well, the problem with that, I agree with you, Jeff, but, trying to, if something happens like we missed it last time, you don't want to represent to the public that that's available when it may not be. You know, then you've got an angry citizen and because that's not the official, record. It should be available. If it's there, that's nice, but I don't want to include language that's going to subject the city to liability. Yes,
We would have to
exactly.
guarantee that video there, it's just have video make it accessible. And do we want to say that, records should be available for a certain period of time? Yeah, I mean, we see stuff for 10 years.
It's a public record.
Speaking of the virtual records or the actual records? Because the minutes, the resolutions, that's all dictated by the state retention requirements.
So if you have a video of tonight's meeting, how long will the city keep it?
No, that's not. So that's not, I think,
It's not official.
I will have to ask IT how long they maintain.
The point is, it's a city thing. Like, if this wasn't posted on the website, the city had a copy of this, someone could.
So there has to be a, like approved, records retention. And it's approved by the state, I think, a record
Right.
retention period. I don't think the city has. one.
No, the city adopts the states. So we follow the state's records
Yeah.
retentions. But you're talking about the
But that
video
period of
recording
time
of
is-
these meetings.
How long is that,
How long is what?
the record retention?
Well, it differs for every record. Like your official minutes go on for lifetime.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
But
available.
there are certain other records that can be destroyed after a certain period of time.
And would a video that is made be an official record that has to be maintained perpetually?
Yeah.
Okay,
Get from each of
if we don't know the answer, I'd like to know.
Yeah, I would too. That should be good.
Yeah. We'll look at that.
Example, like I requested a court document today, it's 20 years old, and they got it. So I mean, not that someone will come back and watch, well, actually, maybe 20 years from now, there's gonna be another charter review committee, and they're gonna, what are they talking about back then? You can watch the video.
What did you ask for? Is that just something you could
You
request?
have to pay for it.
Is it a FOIA?
It's not FOIA, it's a court, it's not subject to FOIA.
So it's something it's
Separate.
citizen.
Any
You're
person,
not a lawyer.
any
Take a
person,
lawyer,
any
read
public,
portion.
yeah, anybody can request.
I just pulled up the archive meetings, go back to 2012. But there's a button here that says, if you want to see something prior to 2012, click on this button, and click on it, so I don't know about that.
Okay, so we're okay with that for right now. 4.8, we did approve it. It's in the minutes that we approved it. That was one of the ones that we got through. So we're okay with that. 4.9, that's when we talked about our administrative officer. We put that in there because the city attorney is an administrative officer. It's defined before.
4.9, I sent a note on this today because I was reading this. The second administrative addition. I wonder if that's necessary, but this would be my question for, I guess, for the two council. One, do you ever use this section? And would the council ever be, or a council member, requesting information from an employee or officer of the city regarding conduct? I mean, the way it originally reads, department officer of the city, which that could be another city council. So if we limit that to just administrative officers, now we're excluding elected officers. I wonder if that's necessary to change that. Would you want to be able to request information that about an elected officer? This only applies
And
to
so
the power of the city council, city council members.
I don't know how one council member or a council could require another council member to provide documentation, which is your point about an elected officer. Because the elected officers is their fellow city council members.
The way it reads right now, they can. If we had administrative, now we're saying they can't. So that's why I'm just curious, like, does this even ever come up? Does this chapter get cited, you know, when the council ever bothered you to do that?
Now, we did have to do it, but
Yeah.
There's Howard.
We're at 4.9. It's the second one need to be there. You're talking about trying to get it from.
We're scaling it back and limiting it, so we couldn't do that. We currently this, all laws.
And I totally agree with that interpretation. This is just from my notes. Or from my advisors now.
But I think in the first part, we were trying to make it, we were just trying to make it clear that. Sorry. Maybe it was, I think it was the last sentence, second's last sentence, which really generated this. We were debating whether this is all officers. And then there's a misconduct in office thing there, which again, if you're an administrative officer, how does misconduct in office apply to you? Which I had another question, but we keep talking about this, but like we have, we should just look it up, but next meeting, if we have the ethics ordinance, could we have a copy of that circulated? Can we define misconduct in office then? I wish I would look this up first meeting, but it's, I don't know. But if we do, maybe that's something else we should do. If we don't, maybe we should help council. That should be found, defined in the ethics ordinance, which applies to the administrative and elected officers. Or not, or one of the others, I don't know. Just,
Should go and sorry, I just trying to be proper, so
Oh,
sorry if I got, the last sentence in this should have administrative officer, because we've been talking about it in all those places. Part of any employee and administrative officer of the city to constitute. There were 4 places where we were to.
I apologize, I was absent at the last meeting. Was the and because of the video, I couldn't watch back to see what the discussion was. But was the discussion that we wanted to allow members of city council to disobey subpoenas?
I think the point I'm trying to raise is I'm not sure council, Tony, you will have to weigh in. can subpoena one of their own members because they're elected.
Well, under the charter, you can, under the current charter, you can't. And so we'd be making, I mean, if that's the decision we came to, I understand it, but, the charter says they can and they can't, I think.
I don't think it really
Well,
says that, actually.
Okay, sounds fair.
What it says in the second sentence is the council may make an investigation and basically issue subpoenas in order to accomplish that. And the investigation is to municipal affairs, and that would mean, to me, the conduct of any department that is in the city. And it's not about subpoenaing themselves. I don't think that authority is there. They are actually conducting the investigation and issuing the subpoenas. So I don't think it says here, and if we need to make that clear, we can make that clear, but it's never been interpreted as, and we've never used this, I might add. But it doesn't say that we can subpoena another council member. But council in some other location can order the attendance of a council member and authorize somebody to go get them and drag them into, the council chamber.
I agree with that interpretation.
So then the last sentence, we need to add if the failure is on the part of any administrative officer, employee of the city of shall constitute.
So I have a follow-up question. So if that's how it's being interpreted right now, why do we need the clarification?
Well, the real question, I think, is do we need to reword this? Because the objective is to allow council members, that was a problem when we made this change, to allow council members to interact with employees by asking questions, not ordering them around, but asking questions about what's going on. How are you doing this? Have you heard yet from the developer who said he was going to do whatever? Those are the type of things that were prohibited prior to that time. So we added that language. The idea to conduct investigations, we probably could work this entire paragraph differently to make it very clear as to what the council authority is and when it can be authorized to be used. I think there's another section that says we, specifically prohibits us from ordering any employee to do anything, basically, unless we have a contract with them. So then we can do that. But I think all this language could be reworked in some way to make it clearer as to what the intent here is.
Well, and I guess I'm confused why this isn't all the city manager's problem. Like, if you think something's going on, shouldn't you say, city manager, give me this report?
But
So-
we can do that.
Yeah, and I think the real thing comes to is even if you have an employee who's declining the directive, you need to have certain authority to go above and beyond just the normal request. And that's where the subpoena comes.
Yeah, that's nice. So we have had in the past, we've had one instance, a question about improper behavior in a department. This was prior to the time that we had this authority. And there was sort of a barrier to council sort of getting to it. It got worked out with the city manager took care of it. But if we ever had that come up again, and we had a city manager who was reluctant to allow the information to be pursued or anything like this, this gives us the authority to say, tough luck, we're doing it.
But shouldn't it be, this is gonna go on your permanent record and we'll be discussing this in your evaluation of the city manager? Like, isn't that the city manager?
Not even go a step further. The city manager's in agreement. They ordered the department to provide the information and they refused. What happened to you?
Be fired.
Well, you can't fire, but then you don't get the information.
Interesting, okay, I hear that.
So there's a legal ramification of subpoena the documents they can't avoid even with the termination.
Okay, so even if
Binding.
the city manager's on the council side and working with council, this may still have to be invoked.
This is a tool that is available. And, I'd also add that there might be times where, the public has observed something, they keep saying, hey, why are we doing it this way? This is really wrong. We're getting screwed on it. And this gives the council the authority to
to jump in with more power to make change.
Does the council have the ability to like investigate one of the, I mean, currently this, I read this as the council does have the ability to investigate one of the other members of council.
I don't read it that way, and I've not seen where council has the right to investigate whereas their own. They're on the same par, they've all been elected by the residents. The courts have recognized that independence, even when there's some conflicts of interest. I'll give you an example. When a spouse of an employee is elected to a school board or a council, and you go into closed session to discuss negotiations, that spouse is permitted to enter, the elected official, and hear the terms and conditions of those negotiations. Because the courts have recognized they've been elected, even though there's benefit there to, the other party by being in the relationship.
I don't know, sorry, let me just make.
Yeah, go ahead.
Point. So like, going back to this pecuniary interest of the council, let's say. If you thought someone had a pecuniary interest in something, didn't disclose it, which is this kind of an office, which you've got office, how is the council supposed to investigate that or make a request for information if they can't answer the council?
Well, I mean, they can, but that would be this section. That would be the ordinance that is authorized by the charter for the council to create, which in one sense could be a little bit stronger, I guess, but when a council member says, I think I have a conflict of interest here because I have a pecuniary, my spouse has a pecuniary interest in the outcome of this particular vote, I ask the council to excuse me from voting because we also have a requirement, you vote on everything. And there have been times when council members, where the council has declined to vote to allow the person to, because they don't really think it's going to make any difference, basically. But there are times when the council has granted the ability to an individual council member to not vote in a certain.
So
And that's all pursuant to the ordinance. Yeah.
So I don't. So the just doing some editing of the sentence or some excising of the sentence, it reads, the council may request information of any officer regarding the conduct of any officer of the city. So if you just take out some words, to get straight to the core of what we're discussing here, the council may request information of any officer of the city regarding the conduct of any officer of the city. So right now, this, I think, in disagreeing with the interpretations, Mark, Anthony, or Tony, Robert, I think this does allow council to investigate.
Yeah.
To make requests for information from other members of council. Which we'd be changing it based on this, the edits that are being recommended here, and I'm not sure. Again, I wasn't here last time. I'm not sure that'd be a wise change to make.
I think you're right. The first sentence says they request it. Second says investigations.
As to municipal affairs, which could be, you could narrow municipal affairs to mean.
Well, it doesn't, that doesn't say, well, I guess the next one though would lead you to think that includes officers of the city, because if they don't produce the appropriate paper or other evidence, that's misconduct in office.
All right.
It says in the office.
So realistically, if I turn to council member Altman, who was on my left during the council meeting, and I say, here, what did you just read about such and such? That's forbidden by this, is basically what you're saying. But if I were to say, I've got to investigate municipal affair on the issues, even if the council member Altman, that is not forbidden.
Well, you can, but the council can.
The council as a body.
Yes, and I think that's all that this says. I agree. I think that's what this says right now.
Yeah.
I agree. I want to make sure everyone understands again. Neither of us were here actually. But all of these changes limit the scope of investigation. We define officers as either elected or administrative in nature, and so this eliminates these provisions applying to elected officers being the 5 council members.
That was the question I had, because to me, it read the council may request information. You can't just skip that and then going regarding the conduct, you have to include employee or administrative officer. And I don't read that as inclusive of members of city council. I mean,
Especially with this.
right.
With the new language, I agree. I think,
Right.
yeah, if we were, I think under the current language,
You're saying the current, are you saying
Current, but-
administration, the current proposed?
the language as it's currently in the charter, not the proposed language, but
Okay.
what's currently in the charter is what I'm reading.
The
I'm sorry.
proposed language, the new language would eliminate this discussion of elected officers.
That's what the administration.
Right, which also makes the misconduct in office pretty pointless here. I mean, at least under the current way the city does business, because there are only elected officers, the administrative officers are only defined as the city attorney. And the city attorney is at will right now, and it's so long as the city attorney remains sorry, it's been a long day, contracted, instead of city employee, then there's no really, they're at will. So that there's no need to define contract office for administrative officers, where the only administrative officer is an actual employee anyway, or an at-will contract anyway.
So, you know, 5 attorneys at the table.
This is what happens.
And, I
Be the
think,
judge.
I will not be the judge. The school will be the judge. What do we want this to say? Do we want this to just be applying to, any employee or administrative officer and not becoming council members? And is that where we're going? And then we work on the language, or do we want to include that?
Well, I would just suggest that the intent was never to council members. Maybe the language actually was constructed. So, if you want, this language makes clear that they're not included in this.
All
So
right,
I guess the question becomes, do we want the language to include, that's the policy question we're grappling with here, is do we want this to include, to get council members to investigate potential wrongdoing by the members of council? You can make arguments either way, because you can see it like against, saying that, no, we don't want it to, and council to be able to investigate other members of council is they're on an even playing field. They've all been elected, and if 4 don't like one and they decide we're gonna look into something and find something, that would be a problem. On the other hand, the argument for it, I think that if something truly is wrong, someone needs to have the authority to look into it. And I don't know who else it would be besides council itself.
Are we stipulating to be a majority of council or anything like that?
council's actions would be a majority.
So that goes without saying that it can't be an individual council person.
I would,
No,
well, I think saying the council may make investigations required it to be, so one member can ask for information, but only council as a whole can issue a subpoena.
That's absolutely accurate. And that goes back to your policy question on the second sentence.
Yeah.
Goes back to the first one as well, where you were saying if 4 people want to gang up against one, that also where you, in the first sentence, where you do have one council member allowed to request information about any employee or department.
Yeah.
That runs that same risk of if there was a bully, but again, maybe it's one council member that sees something wrong.
What if the first sentence included as to municipal affairs? So you limited the ability of people being asked over something that's not, it obviously ought to be, well, maybe not obviously. I would think it's about municipal affairs, but,
I think it kind of already is limited, sorry, it's because it's regarding the conduct of any department officer, city, I guess,
well, no,
I guess conduct broader.
conduct of the officer could be,
Yeah, that's fair.
I saw such council member at his party doing this.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with municipal
So it
affairs.
says, it doesn't say officer, it says office
Or,
or administrative officer.
Or officer of the city. You're reading the amended. version.
I'm sorry, yes, you're right.
The way it reads right now.
You're correct, I'm reading the amendment.
So Jeff, just to clarify, you are suggesting that the first sentence read, the council or any council member may request information regarding municipal affairs.
Well, I'm still trying to think this through. Just if we did keep it where the council could investigate a council member, seems like, to me, it seems like it probably ought to be something like that, because I don't know how you would investigate some of this misconduct in an officer or something that happened. Maybe the council should have that power, I don't know. But it should be limited, I guess the question should be limited to just city business, not your personal life or whatever else someone wants to try to gang up on you for or something like that.
But Jeff, if you were on council and you were you wanted to look into another council member and because you felt like something was going on, you would have to get the rest of the council to agree to do that. You can't, just one person can't turn around and say, I want to do that, go into it. And you have a city attorney here that the council, if there was a concern about somebody doing something, council member doing something, they can't really embezzle money because they don't have access to money. They be out there promising some things to people and saying, I'll get this, and taking bribes to try to pass a vote. You would have to say that you're going to do an investigation in that. You would have to get other council members to do that. You yourself just couldn't do that because we don't want one-on-one going after one. You would have to, and you would consult the city attorney, I think, to say, I think this is going on. What should we do? And that city attorney would help the council members. I don't think the average council member is going to turn around and not going to be as well versed in legal affairs as you are. They're going to look to the legal entities to give them advice on how to do this if they brought some evidence. So I think that when you say council, it's not a council member to a council member.
Pursue the sentence Jonathan did earlier where you can cut it to read, any council member may request information of any employee regarding the conduct of any department, office, or officer of the city.
I'm not taking a position on it, so I just think the way it reads, I agree with Jonathan, I think exactly what this would say right now. It's never been used, never will be. It shouldn't be. But if we're going to change it, software back to the proposal, what's that administrative officers, eh? So if we're doing that, it limits that. Then is that wise?
I thought my memory of this conversation was just to clarify that it wasn't, it was a lot signing. We said employees in some places, administrative officers in another. It wasn't intended to change anything. It was really just to make sure there was consistency, that if we were segmenting employees from administrative officer, that be done in each of the 4 locations in that paragraph. It wasn't to change anything else.
So you're right, because if you're an employee, but you're an employee, right?
I'm an employee, but I'm also referred to as an administrative officer.
So as an administrative, as an employee, you'd be subject to a misdemeanor.
If he's an administrative officer, so you can't be.
And it's really squirrely, because it also says that if you're an employee, it's a misdemeanor.
I think it's a chart better.
That's where they were saying the language should track, because everywhere else it says employee or administrative officer. And then when you finally get to the penalty, it drops to administrative officer and says employee.
We're good, it's golden, and the employee is, it seems to be unfair.
The officers in misconduct in office.
That would be unless misconduct in office is by the. I mean, I don't know why. I believe there was a reason this was done.
Well, that was.
Is,
And
it's
last
a misdemeanor if they refuse to honor a subpoena, but if you're an administrative officer, this is like a bigger hit, I think.
Yeah, so the way it reads now, if you're misconduct in office, if you're an elected officer, which is sort of included, you could be wrongs.
And in terms of this discussion about council members, I think you got to keep in mind 3.7, which says that the office will not be shortened or extended, period. So once you're elected, you're there for 4 years. But the council doesn't really have the authority to lessen that anyway, unlike the legislature, which has the power to judge the members and determine whether they can be seated or.
But
Okay, so let's
wait,
back to
hold on, Mark.
4.9.
Hold on, sorry, just a second, because that, so then if you have misconduct in office, it's a vacancy, you're out, your term is short. right?
Only, my understanding, only if the governor.
Or if you retire section 3.4, this says if you're convicted, if you're misconduct in office, you're the vacancy. It's a matter of law. So it shortens your term. I mean, that's
Where you see it.
this is section 3.4.
I mean, if you commit a felony, all the things that we talked about in
Yeah.
prior meetings, that is a way for a term to be shortened. It's just the other council members
It's
can't.
not shortening a term,
Council members can't
it's
shorten
an individual from the term of office. I think that's where, yeah, I would say, you know, and I've had a lot of discussions about this with the Attorney General who looked at those charters, because I agree that there is a state law that says there's, you know, if there's inappropriate action, I can't remember the exact language, then a request can be made to the governor to investigate. The governor has the authority to.
That's what happened.
But
It's what happened in the city of Detroit with Mayor Polly Kilpatrick. The governor had to, and I don't know if their charter is different than this or the state law Trump. The governor came in to hear that case and consider the removal of the mayor from office.
State law trumps that the governor's power as the Constitution.
well, but it may not be totally preemptive of having local power, which was the opinion of Attorney Elmer from the Attorney General's office, where he said, additionally, you have charter, because I was trying to strike a provision of a charter that said, if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, you're automatically removed. And I said, you know, we're removing that because it's unenforceable. The governor has to remove it. It's like, no way. And he did give me substantial information saying that these alternatives to remove from office are still enforceable under charter.
And ours says 4 meetings. That's 4 meetings, say you're wrong. Without it.
And a reminder, 3.4 is still in my red folder, which is, we're still working on that. So it's misconduct in the office. So the green folder.
Spending our bills on 4.9.
Yes.
Please. No one has any suggestion on what's in.
I think it says 4.9, you know, I think we either take it all, you know, we either take the changes or we don't. I think we thought of some new stuff tonight that maybe we shouldn't be voting on tonight, whether we want to accept or, but it's become a policy question as opposed to just a clarifying question. So I think we should think about it.
Yeah,
Is
I
this
think
where we want to go back to potentially the model charter as well to look at
No,
maybe a
what-
clean rewrite? Because I think.
What are other cities do?
Yeah,
Something like this. Or they make a decision.
this is new with notifications on when it would have ever been added. You don't have to-
That would have been 1997 for that ability to ask questions of staff. I don't know what it shows here.
Here it just shows the latest 4.8 is the latest repealed and then amended. It says 4.7 doesn't have any reference to 4.9 on here. It's amended. Number.
Yeah, I don't know why that wouldn't have that in. I'm pretty sure that it was done in 97. I mean, yeah, in 97 or 98. Because we did it 2 years.
This definitely seems wrapped up in the misconduct in office discussion in general. They have one that, it's gonna have one this.
The last one, it says it was on the ballot and it said this amendment 4.9, this whole one that we're talking about. This amendment gives council members greater access to information from city officers and employees regarding the conduct of their office or department. That was the statement purpose for why it was put on the
all right,
ballot.
so our charter, we need to talk about updating the charter because it doesn't have that notation in the.
But it's 97.
And one thing on the penalty provision of 4.9, right now, the way I read it is that the officers of the city, which include the administrative officers, so the bosses, commit misconduct in office if they fail to comply with what city council does, which is not really a penalty, a punishment to them. It doesn't mean anything on its malness because they're at will employees, they can be fired, you know. Whereas the employees, so the lower level people are able to be criminally charged and punished, which seems opposite of how we would want that to work, where I don't need to say, you know, the lesser people get charged with crimes, whereas the bosses just get off. It doesn't seem ideal to me as a policy decision. But just something else to keep in mind as we're looking at that.
All right, so we're putting that aside. We're gonna move on to, section 6.5, what was our next one on the agenda? 6.5, this is again goes to where we're locating the code, the resolutions and the charters amendment.
And this one
Compilation.
very likely needs to be changed substantially from what the draft modifications are given the prior discussion.
Put that aside.
Can you just delete that section and put it in the new chapter?
That's what it really seems like we should do. Yeah, so I'll make a note of
That's
that.
chapter
And-
8.
Just something to highlight, I've struggled to find resolutions in the past, and I've looked to see when certain ordinances were passed. I do think it's important that we make it all resolutions as opposed to right now on the website. I think just recent, but like most 5 or 10 recent resolutions are accessible on the website. So everything's accessible if you go ask somebody, but in terms of easily accessible, it's much more narrow. So I do like that aspect of the changes.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Bowman's gonna get the dates of when we have this stuff digitalized going forward, because there's a lot of resolutions that you could never find if they were too far back.
Although we go pretty far back on the website.
So if you know, like it's specifically, so I'm talking about when you look at the code of ordinances, they have like recently adopted ordinances, which show the last 5 to 10. So if I knew exactly when, you know, a certain law was passed, I could go back and to the minutes and see the language there. It's just, that's a lot of, you know, that can be burdensome. And so, because you have to know the specific date and things like that, whereas I would think, especially criminal ordinances, especially, would be easier to just be able to see like, oh, this was what change was made on this date. You know, like, for example, when the disorder.
So it doesn't tell you when it was last amended.
That's a good point.
So a state
doesn't.
statute will tell you.
Yeah.
The list, the dates of amendments to it, not necessarily the content of that, but the dates at least.
Right.
And so you're suggesting that at least in the muni code or whatever, that we have that information. I think that's great. That's a great suggestion. So I don't know whether muni code actually does that or can, but that may be a reason, like for some other reason, for a way to keep our municipal ordinances available.
Yes, so I'm looking at Grant just right now. September 18th.
6.11 is the next one. This was just when we talk about having it understood in an ordinance adopted by the electorate through the initiatory petitions instead of proceedings. We just amended it. Does that meet everyone's approval?
I think that should be single petition and not petitions. If you look above, say a referendary petition, normally referred to initiatory petition, not petitions.
So
Yes, all I'm saying.
So does someone want to move that if we're okay with that? So we can just,
I still move. Maybe you can split.
no,
As amended.
it's moved by Dr. Representative Johnson, supported by
Support.
Renee. To approve 6.11 ordinance suspended with the change from proceedings to petitions. Any more discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. Green file. 7.1. What is our planning commission. This is the administrative officers that we've talked about quite a bit. We're talking about 7.1B.
And I hope my notes were accurate. This was a reference that derogation was not common, question, whatever. And so the idea was to say, still establish that any contract for the city manager and city attorney can establish duties and responsibilities, but in no way can those be less than minimize their duties under the charter.
And that was the simple language.
Yeah.
For understandable. Are you okay with that?
That makes no sense.
I question if that's small that you want, but first, or we have to change it, I go just the way it's supposed to.
No,
So,
no.
according to those voters, more stuff, I see, I don't think it's necessary, I'm not like principally opposed to it, I just don't think it's like a necessary. change.
What was my suggestion, and even when I looked at irrigation, it didn't really make sense to me. Common panels, maybe a legal speak, but diminishing. But, yeah, I don't, that's fine.
Others?
I tend to agree with Jeff on this one, that we get additional thing to vote on. It wouldn't really change any
That's fair.
content.
I have a problem with it going back.
All right, 7.1 will stay the same. Okay, next one is 7.2.
I had one thing, just go back a little bit. This conduct in office is a common law offense subject to the provisions of MCLA 7.505, which is a felony.
Oh, Mark, can you say that again?
Yeah, misconduct in office is a common law offense subject to MCL 750.505, which puts penalties on common law offenses that are covered by any other statute.
I think we're gonna need, because I think the charter defines misconduct in office differently. And so how the charter definition would supersede, and so,
Good question.
yeah, that's
We did
my,
that to Tony.
yeah.
So, we're on 7.2. And this is, the city manager here. I'm gonna say this because I read through this. I still am not really comfortable with, if you designate somebody if you just leave the city on vacation. But do we not want, this charter says we want somebody designated to take your place if you died tomorrow. So that council didn't have to come together. Everybody's there and nobody knows what to do because they have to wait until council has a meeting versus, and having you decide if you're gonna step in if I die tomorrow. And basically, that's the only time you want to have it is if something like that happens, or if you had a serious illness and you just had to have someone step in rather than these interim ones, that person at least knows that they're responsible to keep themselves ready. I know in the past, I know that they designated one, and it's not like they get the title or anything. It's just, nobody puts, they go to council and say, this is the person that's going to step in if I'm incapacitated. And then, that person, if I remember, the one person that I know that agreed to be the deputy said, well, the only thing I want is because I have a contract right now because I'm one of the top people in the department is I want this in my contract so that if I'm in that role, I'm protected. They just asked for additional severance if they were put into that role because they could be fired very quickly. That was the only thing that they asked for. But it just felt like the council didn't have to meet immediately. Somebody was running the city because what would happen tomorrow if you weren't here? And you weren't going to be here for the next 10 days. What do you think would happen?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Actually, I had my hand up before you spoke, but
Okay.
I've given more thought to this. the only issue I guess I have with this provision, not to take it completely out, but the time frame of 90 days is too short for a new manager to come in to assess who on the staff is capable of being that deputy city manager for the purposes that you're talking about. And so I was gonna ask to take out the elimination of it, but to really look at that timeline, how is that I think in 6 months, I'd have, or whoever would have good assessment of their staff as to who could serve in that capacity.
I actually, when I flipped this over thinking, I thought, I bet you 90 days is too short if you're brand new. And I agree exactly the 6 months, but then that gave you some comfort that at least something happens in the first 6 months, everybody's screwed up. Because
It goes back to the way it was, no.
there could be nobody there, but,
I
I
think
just,
this was missing a comment.
Yeah, I think 90
I
days
think-
of residency.
Yeah, I think what they intended to say, now I can see how you could read it that way. I think this is a long enumerated list of things that don't necessarily belong together, but I think it was saying, and need not be a resident of the city at the time of appointment, but shall become a resident of the city within 90 days after his or her appointment, comma, and shall, with approval of council, designate a city manager who shall perform the duties during vacancy.
So we struck all that.
Right, but we're asking to put the deputy back in. I was under the impression there was a timeline on it, but maybe there's not a timeline.
The way it's written, that you can't really tell. I'm just trying to figure it out.
I mean, there should be a reasonable.
I'm looking at, I'm looking at something different. This says, he shall designate an administrative officer to serve as acting city manager during an absence from the city. What we're talking about is saying he has to do that period in advance so that if there's somebody in place, once he's appointed, he appoints someone to sit in, but he has to be gone.
Right,
The 90 days and all that stuff is struck out of the version I'm looking
That's
that's the conversation we're having.
at. And I say, keep it up.
no, I say 90 days residency. We want the residency, that strikes the residency.
Yeah.
But
Do that.
I Googled that and I found 2 different places that said you could, so municipalities.
I can tell you right now, I've sued city Lansing person over the residency
Or
request.
city managers, because
This
this
was
was
city attorney, prior city attorney was not an employee, so that actually probably didn't apply, because the state law applies to employees. So it definitely applies.
Well,
It may not apply to a contractor, which is a question that I never got resolved.
It was in one of the munis, and it was specific for city managers, and then it could be stipulated by, but maybe it's out of date now, but I'll send it around.
Just because another city has it, we have it, doesn't mean it's allowed.
No, it's a muni standard. It was a muni, it's, those, anyway, I'll send it. Maybe it's for other states.
No, that may apply to being able to stipulate by contract, because we could certainly, Mr. Bellman agreed within his employment contract to say, yeah, and I'll move into the city within 6 months. That is enforceable as a contract, or at the local, I can find it. But undoubtedly, Michigan state law absolutely prohibits that.
Comes up like police
Yes,
officers all the time. and
Sure, I know it happened with
no,
employees.
it's fire laws apply to city.
Yeah, I saw specifically city managers did not.
But going back to the discussion on deputy, there was a requirement to appoint a deputy for the purpose that you were explaining, and after you explained it, it made sense. So, but I was under the impression it had to be done within 90 days, and I'm saying as a new city manager, it takes a little bit longer to assess your staff before you can identify someone among, department heads that is going to be dubbed that person.
So what that would be then is editing the edits to strike the language after religious preference, adding a comma there, and then reinstating and shall, with the approval of council, designate a city manager who shall perform the duties of city manager during vacancy in the office. And so, is that right? Yeah, and so if we do that, by the way, the reference is the Residency of Public Employees Act, Act 212, 1999.
I'm sorry, say that again, Tony.
It's the Residency of Public Employees Act. It's Act 212 of 1999.
Is there an MCL?
It's MCL 15.601S.
Zero.
I think they're.
I knew it was fire. I just-
All right.
And then I thought we also were adding, you can then designate an administrative officer or department head. So he has more ability than that list in A.
And that's how I was trying to amend that second sentence, because that's what it looks like to me to say that although he's appointed the deputy city manager to serve during a vacancy in office, independently, he has an obligation, and this was a question, whether you wanted it to be optional or mandatory, to designate an administrative officer to serve as the acting city manager during absence, as opposed to a vacancy in the office.
First one is the vacancy, and definitely you want to have somebody that's designated. We had no time frame on it right now. In
But
here.
the way it read, it seemed like it was.
Clean that up, yeah, that'll be cleaned up.
And then the last sentence would be the city manager shall designate. We had that discussion that we definitely want somebody that knows that they're the go-to person when the couches start burning and who activates it.
Which happens now. So I submit a list of individuals that would be identified while I'm on vacation or holiday to cover for me, and then I send out a specific notice prior to my departure.
The deputy city manager could also be on vacation. So that's why you had to have that.
Right, the works are striking that right now, but we just need to be careful to unstrike that. Because I think,
The creation of the deputy city.
right, if we're unstriking the creation of the deputy city manager, we also need to unstrike that the acting city manager only comes into effect when the city manager is out.
The last strike.
Last strike, yeah.
Or rather than designating somebody as a deputy city manager, just simply say, the city manager shall designate an administrative officer to serve as acting city manager during an absence or a vacancy in the office.
That makes a lot more sense to me rather than creating another city employee.
Right, we don't need to have it, I don't think.
Well, it's not a city employee.
I don't think we need to have a 2 and a 3 for the city manager. I think a 2 would suffice.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing is the other way that it's set up now is we would have a 2 and there's a potential for a 2 and a 3. A deputy city manager and an acting city manager, that they're not necessarily the same person.
Right.
I think that, yeah, under the way it's written out, they wouldn't be the same person. So we'd be creating like the vice president and designated survivor, which I'm not sure we necessarily need.
Right.
Nice to know.
Yeah.
So I do have a question regarding administrative officers. So I do believe there's a law out there prohibiting the clerk, and maybe somebody else, from holding this office, even in the interim, because of duality of.
To the extent there is, I mean, that would just be a limitation on this ability, and so they would be able to choose from the administrative officers in a manner consistent with state law. They have.
That's where we should really add that, because I don't know if finance director falls in that. I know the clerk falls in that. But they can't be the person supervising themselves. And they call the clerk out specifically in that act.
All right, so are you concerned that we have someone that's a deputy city manager designated plus, and that person may not be the acting city manager when there's a absence? Because I think when there's a vacancy, you have to have someone that's going to step in there right away.
And that would be the deputy.
That would be the deputy, so it's
So why do you need an
instances. Because that deputy, these two are at a conference, the deputy and this person for a week down at the ICMA conference. They're there for the week. Who's minding the ship here?
But the deputy could go with, I mean, historically, we haven't had a deputy, I don't think, since sometime during Ted's, administration. And, but there has always been a person designated as a deputy. I mean, not a paid deputy.
No, it was a duality of roles.
So
So we had
that, Tim
double time.
was a deputy, under George, or the deputy under George, and whenever George was gone, but he also sometimes went with George.
Yeah.
To places, so somebody else had to be running the ship while they're gone,
He always went to Tim first.
right? So,
Oh, Tim,
I'm going way back.
2019.
Sorry.
so there might be a reason to sort of rework this language, so that we can cover those two circumstances and make sure that whether it's somebody who's designated as your deputy, but at least an administrative officer is there in case there's they can see that develops. Somebody gets in an auto accident, doesn't make it. And then, when there's just the city manager's gone from the city and somebody needs to be around, it could be more than one person.
But I can tell you that those designations are critical in terms of event response or disaster coverage response. So you have to have a specific leader that calls it the event, and in God forbid, there's a real event, you need to have specific people identified that are going to step in their roles.
So I
I
guess
think council has been comfortable with the way Robert has been doing it. I don't know if that sort of fits within the language that we
I'm gonna
have.
clean this up to do that, and I think that definitely includes putting back in city manager and deputy city manager in that last line.
and I don't think it needs to be a shall, I think it can stay as it's written in the current charter, that's just, when they're gone, appoint someone. Like, I don't think it needs to be, that this isn't a permanent position which a shall would, require that someone is always acting.
Don't have to act to be identified. And if they're not identified and God forbid the bus goes off the cliff, it really is good to have an individual, a position identified. And
Well, an individual is more important than a position, I think.
Okay, Tony's gonna take care of that, and that'll come back to us. So that's 7.2. Now we're on to 7.4. And this is the city clerk. 7.4A, we added or their designee because they were requiring the city clerk shall attend all meetings of the council and shall keep all the permanent journal in English. We struck English out of there, but that's where we put the language of the proceedings. We could keep this the way it is because it's giving the clerk's responsibilities that they have to have somebody at the council meetings to keep the minutes. But it's not requiring the same person. So if that looks good, 7.4 resolution, we could take a motion.
I would move to pass it.
Okay, moved by John Foreman. Supported by Veronica Lucas Johnson. Any more discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All the same sign. The resolution for 7.4 passes. 7.5.
I hope I got this accurate. I think maybe this was from Bill. Where the statement was that all the books of the account shall be balanced at the end of each calendar year, and apparently that was inconsistent with
Calendar.
process. I'm sorry, month, and that was inconsistent with process, and we do it quarterly.
I think that's what I was.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
It's
Sorry.
a quarter.
I just assumed this.
I'm sure
She's
they're
got some-
balancing it.
she's got
but
some
it's
insight
important
knowledge.
also.
Okay. Are we okay with this?
So.
Would you, well, let's go back.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep it balanced at the end of each calendar month and reported to quarterly and then the quarterly?
I said monthly, I'm certain.
So I don't think we need to change it. I don't think that what Robert's describing is, I don't think it's mandated here that a report is made to council each month. It's just that books be balanced each
Shall be
month.
balanced and a report made, the report being separate and distinct without a time frame reference. I think that's it.
Put it up and do it today.
So let me summarize where we're at with our list for here on our new business. Section 2.2 passed. Section 4.7, we're still out. Section 4.8, We already had done that the meeting before, so that's been fixed. Section 4.9, we still have out. Section 6.5, we're going to change those things and based on starting in chapter 8. Transparency and accessibility of public records. Section 6.11 is passed as is. 7.1, we decided there's going to be no change. We leave it as it is. 7.2, Tony's going to work on this to get our thoughts on that. 7.4 is passed, and section 7.5 we're leaving as is. I'm going to open. This is our continued discussion of 5.10, and we sort of went to that a little bit before. This is where we talked about eminent domain and appropriation of public property. And
But where are we at on the agenda?
5 point,
So,
we're on old business. And we want to continue discussion on 5.10.
Genesis 5.1. Oh, no, never mind, that's 5.1 and 5.10. Yeah, sorry.
So you had that question on your list of things. Joe.
Yeah, I think it was just, making sure this is consistent in current law.
I reviewed it, I think it's consistent with state and the domain law.
Does the city need to have power in its charter to?
That's, you know, that's one of the things. If I was going to lean the charter perfectly, I would take this out. It's a policy question of whether you want to go to the voters and say, take out the eminent domain because it's the same thing as state law and state law controls, so it's really not. You know, it's not necessary.
Not necessary, but it's also not hurting anything.
Is it worth taking to the
Yeah.
voters? Yeah, exactly
And
right.
explain to the voters that
We're not saying, yeah,
we're not going to have eminent domain anymore, but we really are.
Yeah.
We're just not going to have it in our charter.
That's right.
All right, so we're okay. We're going to just leave that, okay. And 6.1 is the next continued discussion. And this is what our policy versus resolutions and so we talked about at the very bottom of the page. It says no ordinance shall be finally passed by council at the same meeting which is introduced, which is true, which is that the case. No ordinance. But I watched city council meetings, but no ordinance shall be revised, altered, referenced, and then we talk about when does the 15 days start? On 6.3. What is the law? See, it says shall become immediately upon the publication thereof, shall be published according to applicable law. Is it,
Yes,
whenever
so
it's published, it's there and it has to be done within 15 days of this meeting?
publish it within 15 days, it becomes effective immediately upon publication. So if it's published 7 days after, it would be effective 7 days after. They have a window, the clerk's office has a window of up to 15. That's especially important now, given very limited publication ability due to limited, media.
Okay, and then we had 6.5 is specifically going to our chapter 8.
Wait, John, what, logically, isn't that quicker? Say the publishing process is slower?
So many newspapers are either gone
Oh, that's
completely,
right.
where they're published once or twice a week. instead
Okay,
of-
that's right, you got to do
Yeah.
the publishing. Is that a state one?
Yeah.
That's, okay. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so then 6.5, it's not quite on here, but this is where we're talking about, again, where we're access. So do you want to flag 6.5 and pull that out of there, or when you do chapter 8, or do we leave this compilation of all this here? And are we selling the code for the city of East Lansing now that they're electronic?
No.
Yeah, I mean, this, depending if 8 gets, I think we just flag it at this point for second review, because if 8 gets adopted or recommended for adoption, then we would want to delete this. But it's going to be even more complicated as I think about it, because then we have to provide it as a package of bills to the city council, because they can't delete 6.5 if they don't take out
Adopt, yeah.
8, right? So we'll have to figure that out.
Could all be part of the same resolution or?
That's what we'd have to recommend.
Yeah, and what we were discussing was giving a standard location for where we're publishing, but also putting that wording, not everywhere, but in one location.
And then, you know, at the state level, we call it a dive bar. So we just put a dive bar next to whatever. we do.
But we will delete the last sentence. That we're not going to provide and sell.
The alternative, we can definitely do that.
And 6.6 is where we talk about how do we get the periodic review of the code. And we talked about, Jeff talked about sunsetting everything. We went to sunsetting every ordinance, or how do we review it? We talked about who is responsible to do this. I honestly believe, because council changes over, that the city manager knows they use the charter every day. They use that they should know when to flag it for the council, telling the council, and then directing them to do a committee to do it. It says, council shall by resolution direct the review to 10 years, or do you want to have a trigger or what?
Well, so I didn't say actually, everything. There's a Jocelyn mentioned criminal statutes. We talked, Martin mentioned anything that grants property rights, certain things that definitely keep nonsense. If there is a way that you could, the reason to have a sunset is that then this is like an enforcement mechanism for this, you force the council to deal with something. Otherwise, they just get kicked down the road and never deal with it. I thought I said last time an idea that rather than just having it once every 10 years, it's all on one council, which is an enormous task. You just have a rolling basis. And it's always on the council agenda. Something 10 years after it's come up should be by that council. That way you're not dumping everything on a single council. You have different councils, different council might be reviewing ordinances rather than, or what if you have one bad city council looks at everything and tries to change a bunch of stuff. Not that they can't do that anyway. They can close amending ordinance at any time, but just as like a code maintenance thing, that's the council's responsibility regardless of who's here one day and brings the council to everything, you know, ordinance such and such was passed 10 years ago. Review it again. If you don't review it, is it meaningless, or do you create some sort of kicker so when council has an incentive, we have to review it or it's going to expire? That's what I was.
I think staggering makes a lot of sense, but I think, this one's done everything as city manager, but I think that having the city.
You're not the only one, don't worry.
I think keeping the city, I mean, the concern isn't that council wouldn't deal with it, it's that they didn't think about it. And so I don't know if an enforcement mechanism is required if they're getting notification from the city manager that it needs to happen. And then if they choose not to do it.
What about the clerk? Is the clerk the ones who's responsible for like, stamping an ordinance or what's the term, but
They certify.
certify? No, it doesn't have to be the city manager, I'm saying.
Yeah, no, having somebody to the city clerk's responsibilities there about his overload as the city manager.
Yeah, but
Someone's got to track.
we don't hire admins, we don't have secretary.
I mean, some of this is, to me, and I'm sorry, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I'm hampered a bit here, but it seems to me that just throwing out a lot of this stuff sounds like throwing babies out of bathwater. If it comes to the attention of the city council that there's a problem with ordinances or that our people are struggling to apply them, then it makes sense to go back through and say, let's look at the code and see if there's a way we can cluster, where, maybe, public littering appears 5 times in the city code in different places. And now you've got somebody who's being charged with public littering. They say, yeah, but it's here, you know, it says I can do it here, but I can't do it there. And so the council has to take a look at that. But to go ahead and say, well, we're going to go ahead and have to we're going to sunset these, or we're going to, you know, look at the first 5 chapters, then if that littering stat, you know, ordinance is in chapter 2, but another one isn't until chapter 7, then there's no continuity of reviewing the charter or the ordinance either. So I understand the need for review, but just saying that we're going to do all of this all at once seems to be cumbersome.
I agree. We think this is a hard task, what we're doing with the charter. Doing that with the code would be.
I don't, you know, that's good. That's good reference. I mean, I think we're dealing with how many pages here? 43 pages. The code is the same font. I mean, it's probably 5,000 to 10,000 pages. And so the idea of even me getting through it, it'd be like, what is that, painting the bridge, and the National Bridge, you know, like 10 years isn't even long enough for me to start reading on page 1 and getting to the end and starting. So that's just something to kind of take into consideration. I don't have the answer because I think this is a very valid provision, but
It's
I mean,
common.
yeah, and I just don't know
Well,
what the answer is, but that's just a practical
now, I
consideration.
initially read this as the charter.
I did too. I just look at this now and I think, oh, it's a code.
So,
Yeah.
so mightn't it make sense for the charter? Now, the charter hadn't been reviewed. The code includes the charter, right? It's the charter and ordinance. Oh, it's just ordinance. So there's no structure around when the charter. It's just the individual ordinances, and our ordinances don't usually have a sunset clause built into them. So that assumes that they are. So,
Until there's an issue
yeah,
and we dig into it,
yeah.
that prompts change.
History man, Mark, what do you think?
Well, I think there was a point in time where we went, oh my God. I think it's time to recodify because some of that's charter. And, you know, I can't remember the time frame, but we were with a different sort of system before we went with muni code. So muni code was considered, I want to say 2000. So in 2000, so for the last time that we did this, it was muni code again. And I think that has worked well for us. I think the thing that people brought up that's sort of missing is, okay, where do we have something that, one, we no longer utilize whatsoever? You know, how do we find that through this process? Or where we have staff telling us this language is a problem because we can't really enforce it. So, you know, people think this is happening, it's not really happening. Things like that. And I would hope that any kind of review like that relies on public input that tells us when we have a problem, and the city attorney who is identifying those areas. And it doesn't mean we're going to get everything every 10 years. But I think going through a process of some kind during that time frame is useful, both publicly and to tell people that we're interested. You know, the ordinances are designed to do X, and if they're doing Y, that doesn't, you know, that's not really what we intended. We need to either amend or remove the ordinance. We haven't repealed a lot of ordinances in my memory. I know that as we go forward with the rental code, we're gonna have to repeal a bunch of language in chapter 6 and all of chapter 10, whatever section that is. But we haven't done a lot of that in the past, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have for some, but it also means that we have a pretty solid code that addresses those issues. And I agree with Tony. You know, you're looking at it on. There's a lot of language here to go through, and how will that be accomplished? But I think just a general review that is consistent with this language is useful to the public. And it also means that we should have a public hearing regarding this at some point at the 10-year period so that the public has an opportunity to come in and practicing attorneys come in and talk to us about issues that there might be with any of the ordinances that we have. Not to say that you shouldn't do that.
Right, you can do that whenever, right, exactly.
But that makes a lot of sense to me, that it wouldn't be a line by line review of every ordinance, but an opportunity for the citizenry to be invited in to discuss ordinance changes and issues around ordinances. But
this, part of the issue is that this hasn't happened, right?
Oh, it has happened.
Does it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It is, I'm trying to think, I was elected in 95. So in 2000, I think we went through this process. I think that's when we switched to Unicode as the organization that's sort of managing our ordinances. And then we did it again in 2020 because it was a 10-year period. And
Because we didn't do it in 2010, because that was when we switched attorneys. That's when we switched city managers, and, it was up and down for who was in charge.
Okay, so maybe we went to Unicode before that then. I don't remember when we did that, but I know we had periodic.
It was there, I think it was 2000, and then 2010, we didn't do the council, because I know McGinty was the attorney at the time, and I believe he knew that he was supposed to do it. As Staten was the city manager, they both left right around 210 to 211. And so then everybody was new, and so that was not the high priority. It was orienting everybody. And so if you did it in 2020, then great.
Yeah, I think it's happened in 2020. I'm always positive it did. I left early in 2020, but I believe that was already in process at the time.
So ideally, part of this process would be trying to pick up the code so that it's not 150,000 pages or whatever it is, because ideally, yeah, your code is concise and modern. It's like the old statutes of, a woman can't cut her hair or whatever. They're still on the books, it's like stupid stuff that it doesn't come up unless someone's forced to review it or someone challenges it. I don't know if that's the best way to deal with it or if you be more proactive, which is what I was trying to suggest. You wouldn't have the sunset stuff, but if you did it on a rolling basis, you just said an ordinance reviewed every 10 years, but you don't dump it all on the state council, then just.
Also, it'd be easier if it was somehow designed to be chapter by chapter. So that, that in one period of time, we're reviewing the entire zoning code, or one period of time, we're reviewing the building code, which basically got the international building code. But if you look through the ordinances in the Unicode, there is an inconsistency in the way we address ordinances. So we like the MCLA, we know there's a consistent numerical system that goes through there that we can refer to report. That isn't always the case in our municipal code, and that could be fixed. But that also is a lot of work. That's sort of like you're looking at it something one day and you go, is this numbered this way, or why are there lowercase letters here, but now there's numbers doing the same thing in another location. You're wondering, how did they come up with this? So we do need to take care of that when we know.
Something that came up with me recently is not all criminal offenses passed by the city are listed in the offenses section of the code, which is mind-boggling. Because how are you supposed to know if you're breaking a criminal law without it? It's literally not listed in the 7 or 6 chapters or the 6 articles of the offense chapter. It's hiding. I had one recently where it's hiding somewhere else. I don't need to get my word, but so, I think it's it's the language of 6.6 is really broad. It doesn't say what the review has to be, just that there has to be a review. So it could be as simple as council saying, hey, we want, it could be just punching into the citizenry and saying, we're going to have a public hearing for the purposes of the review of the city code on the first meeting of January of every 2 years. You know, it doesn't have to be 10 years, we do every two, you know, every new council that comes in, we're gonna have a review of the code and we'll have a public hearing, and anyone who wants to come in can come in, we'll listen as council and we'll determine what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And that means it's, you know, it would be something that would be on every council's mind, so it would happen every council. It wouldn't be this thing where it's hiding in the charter that has to happen every 10 years, staff turns over and all of that happens. And it wouldn't be anything that needs to be in depth. It would just be a time when people know, hey, this would be the time if I see something in the code that I don't like, here's a day I know I can go beyond just, you know, a regular city council meeting where it may or may not grab it.
A squeaky wheel.
Well, I was going to propose something of the same sort too. It doesn't have to be a comprehensive review of the code, which is what this language seems to suggest. But something where it can be responsive. The city council shall include maybe on its, you know, the first meeting held in the new year, or the first meeting, whatever, designate some time or whatnot, where, you know, pursuant to notice, a hearing will be held with public input regarding ordinances that, you know, the citizens believe need to be changed or amended, you know, amended or added or deleted for that matter. And then start there so that there is some, at least as far as going forward, we know what's being enforced, what's not being enforced, where the problems that the citizens seem to have. And then everything else, nobody's really worried about women cutting their hair anymore. And maybe some point, if it bothers somebody, they can raise it and say, this is ridiculous, it shouldn't be on the books. But to have us go through an ordinance, combing through, you know, 1,500 pages, looking for that kind of stuff is not a good use of everybody's time.
And what you guys have been talking about, though, still meets the plain language of this section as written. Really. It's-
It says at least once every 10 years.
You gotta do it every year.
Yeah, and it doesn't give any level of or by the city attorney, the reviews done by the city attorney, for example, or by committee, just as by resolution of council. So the council could say public hearing every 2 years.
Well, Scott, just heard two examples tonight. This is where I'm frustrated because we know there's issues. You just mentioned the housing things. That was really confusing. I would look through Rita code and I would see 5 or 6 damn, they're all over. And joke earlier about all these attorneys, well, what says this or says that, or what about this or that? I mean, it was very confusing. That should be, you know, cleared up. Criminal.
Should have been the flag.
Yes, well, but this is what I'm saying, it doesn't happen. So, you know, then saying, well, people don't care about it. I care about it. I want the code to be concise, I want to be clear, I want to be up to date, I want it to be simple to read. To be able to find an offense, and they're like, it shouldn't be hidden somewhere off of some section, you can't find it. Now, you can maybe search for it.
I didn't say people don't care about it. Let that be clear. I'm just saying that there's an abundance of stuff. And that if it's not an immediate issue, spending our time going through pages and pages and pages with fine-tooth comb is not a good use of anyone's time.
I disagree. I think the city should have clear laws. The citizens deserve there to be clear laws. They should be understood.
Nobody squabbled with
Stop,
that.
please quit interrupting me. They should be understood and you should be able to find them, read them, and they should be consistent. And that doesn't happen routinely. So that's just been my point, that there's no teeth to this, it doesn't happen. And I think it should.
Oh, Joe, what would you say that just considering that we had, let's go back to when we had a city manager here for 12 years. It had stated, would you have said that since that time, that when there has been, we have different people, everybody, especially different city attorneys, which is the real key piece to this, that has led to some of this, and new staff, and led to some of this. Some people say it's read this way, some people say it's read this way. How did you interpret it? Is that part of what has caused just the most recent issue? And is there a way that we can try to get ahead of something like that before it escalates into petitions, which is our next thing we have to talk about? And is it a function because of just changing over like that? And is that the trigger that we need to do, when that happens, so that there's some way, like, is the trigger when we have a new city attorney, that, the staff and city manager look through the code and sit down with the city attorney and council, and we have public hearings? Because I just feel like everything, just take the most recent one, everybody got different information from different people, and I look at who the people were, and the people, some of them hadn't even been in the city 6 months, you know, when they're giving advice back to people. And they're trying to read it as it is, and like, we're each reading things, and sometimes we see something more in it than what our 5 attorneys see written in there. So how do you get in front of that, rather than taking the whole thing every time? How do you get in front of something? Jill's got
Is it chapters or divisions, or what is it?
Their chapter.
Chapters? Well, maybe we say every chapter has to be reviewed once every 2 years, or something like that. So every year, a chapter or 2 chapters are reviewed.
I wish I
So
could
that
agree with you, but unfortunately, within each chapter, there are chapters. So there are chapters within chapters, and then sometimes chapters within the chapter of the chapter. That's why the idea of making it more uniform, I think that's a long period of time that we have to do that, but that might be an objective that if putting aside any change to the charter or anything like that, that should be an objective of council, maybe a strategic objective, so that we can get that going anyway, and do it chapter by chapter, but eliminate the confusion in there in the way that we would refer to a specific section, because that's a critical element as well.
Then you're not looking at all, we're trying to prioritize, but you do this section and do one every year. And start over.
That's why I would suggest you just do them on a rolling basis. Housing ordinance comes up, and then you can say, oh, well, this also touches 3 or 4 other things. You're not taking on everything at once, but people could identify where, and then you're cleaning up maybe a few chapters of the code on a regular basis. It's gonna be very simple, where just, oh, I don't know, whatever ordinance comes up, we don't need to change it. Everything's good, there's no complaints. Move on, it's easy, but trying to do it all at once is a huge task. But I think it's an important task. Our ordinances shouldn't conflict. And then these things, like Mr. Dahlman said, and maybe someone else, they end up causing problems. Lawsuits, prosecutions, or enforcement actions, and that could be avoided. I think that's the way to try to avoid that.
So how if we put that aside for now? And can you give us a rough, you look at the new community code and you see if there is some way to groupings of things that might be a proposal that would at least get started to try to get a way that we might look at this and designate how it might be applicable, so that it meets what you're looking at, but it's not wrote every paragraph is looked at like we're doing with the charter. And don't do anything with this right now.
Just review the ordinance. Ordinance is 10 years old. Review it. Is this still an effective ordinance? Is there a problem with it? Is it consistent with state law? Is it conflict with another ordinance? If you answer yes to any of those, you fixed it. Don't, just done.
That would be something that I think we equally, it had a similar lack of teeth to what we have right now.
Right, but this is the charter, so it probably isn't gonna stipulate the details of the review. Right, so it's gonna be high level, hey, this has gotta be reviewed. How, of course, if you imagine everybody who's done jobs decides to recommend council review it, how council decides they want to address it.
They may ignore it, but Councilmember Meadows or someone may say, you know what? But in 10 years, we should tweak something.
Right, I just don't know if the charter, okay, so it's in the charter that the ordinances should be reviewed. I don't know if the charter is gonna stipulate how that review happens. That's what I'm saying.
And shouldn't, I agree.
Yeah, so we're getting into the weeds, I think, in the details of how to go about it, and think about how we can write this that makes the ball start rolling.
I agree with discussion, kind of a point of guidance. As we look at our work here, because our work will end at some point, but at what point does what you're working on inform what the council may think of in the future that goes beyond, however we fix the language in this section, someone needs to go forward with it right? The leadership of the future will need to continue to look at this. So I guess I'm asking, as we discuss this, Councilman Meadows, do you take it back and say, hey, you know, the charter committee has come up with a concern that we may want to put into practice in some way that goes beyond what the charter can do?
Yeah,
The
that
charter
wouldn't
doesn't
be just
inform it.
me. You know, I think that there are a number of people here who can recommend to council that they take a longer look at this. But, you know, I do agree with review of whether it's a statute or an ordinance. There should be a regular sort of concept of reviewing impact and whether it is still functioning appropriately. And that is usually the result of public input of one kind or another. So, you know, when it became clear that there were at least some people in this community that read our guest definition differently than staff was reading, then you start to take a look at the entire housing code. And you say, hey, why is this split up into different areas within the ordinance? Well, I know why it happened, because originally it was in one spot. We adopted the International Property Code. We ended up splitting this thing into an area so that not everything was in the same location. Trying to put that back then causes us to take a look at chapter 10 entirely, take a look at chapter 6, and having to remove those provisions that we've now moved into a single location, or will be at some point. And you know, there's a lot of work then that goes into that. I think Tony's still working on the elimination of chapter 10 and moving or limit the amendments to chapter 6. So those are chapters within the chapter that, you know, as I indicated before. But I think that it's usually prompted in that way. It can be prompted by litigation as well, or by state legislation. And those are the key ways that we would look at making changes to the ordinances anyway. I think in some ways that's the best way, because if nobody's complaining about something, then, you know, maybe we don't have to spend any time, basically. But when we start to get complaints about the way something's being done, and I'm thinking back, maybe years ago, we had some kids arrested because they were within 500 feet of a fire, namely a cow burning. And we amended that ordinance because that was clearly, you know, and so that's the type of thing that, you know, really causes us to take action pretty quickly. And that can be considered under this as consistent with this provision. You know, it puts a duty on council and staff to constantly look at the effectiveness of an ordinance and make sure that it's doing the things that it's supposed to. And that may be actually, maybe even information from somebody in the building department says, I don't think this is really working the way that we really intended it. And so we can take a look at that. So I don't know how much detail needs to be in this provision, but clearly we need to be aware of, and the public needs to be aware of, that we have a responsibility to do that review.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion around how it's easier to make a charter change through a petition than it is to make
Yeah, I
an
don't
ordinance.
That, because Jeff brought that up, and that's sort of like the crazy background
Right,
of what happened.
right. So maybe some sort of annual or ordinance review that people knew was coming up, then that could be where they state their concerns. And then the ordinances, which is probably more appropriate for those sorts of details, would be more energized by people instead of going for the charter change.
Yeah, I mean, I think some things just happen naturally, right? Like in 2020, the disorderly conduct ordinances were overhauled, and I think that was the council led the charge there to make that happen. Sometimes it's because the citizens want a change to happen, so we have an election where referendums passed, right? It's things like that happen naturally, where people say, hey, this is a problem or we think this is a problem that we want to have fixed and addressed, so please fix and address it. we can also kind of manufacture, not, which that might be the wrong word to describe it, but say, instead of just waiting for this to naturally occur, let's tell the citizens to get their thinking hats on and look through the, but I don't think that it's helpful to have like a committee who's gonna go look through the fire prevention and protection chapter of the code and say, yes, we should keep the fire prevention and protection code of the chapter, which just adopts by, you know, it adopts by reference a national standard.
Right, but
Right.
what we're talking about is process, so.
Yes.
So there should have, it would be good if there was a clearer process to have concerns about ordinances addressed.
And I think that
That's until I.
that's something Lynn and I were talking about earlier as an idea of first meeting of every year. This is what
Right.
council does.
Right.
And,
Actually, I said that first.
oh, you did, sorry, I'm just,
But
I'm sorry.
but that's what I'm just saying, maybe that and some kind of process around that would, you know, talking to people, why would you do it this way? Well, you could have done it this way. Why did someone get on charter committee? Why didn't they, you know, show up at every city council meeting, whatever?
But I agree with Pam, though. I'm wondering if we're not getting down in the weeds.
Right.
Because I think what Tony pointed out was that what the three of us were talking about suggesting to council that we, you know, put this on an early agenda, you know, or an agenda item sometime or something. That all of that fits within the language already.
That exists, that's
That
right.
exists.
It's reminding you that it's in the charter, they just
And
need
then-
to review it.
Yeah, and then, so while we're speaking around how to do that, we really probably don't.
But some action on it could mitigate other issues.
Right.
So we leave it here and maybe direct an ordinance to try to do this, or we just leave it the way it is?
We noticed it's not happening. We look at both the city manager and our representative on council and said, hey, you
Get to it.
reviewing this one, right?
And keeping
Yeah,
in mind what Jeff has said too, that sometimes when you're passing an ordinance, if you feel like it should be looked at again in 10 years, that might be the new thing that you add as a council member, is to say, should this one be
Yes.
sunsetted? Not sunsetted, but should it have a review and put that in a condition?
And council could always choose to sunset a line. They think it's something that's always temporarily necessary. That's a policy decision that the elected officials can make.
Yeah, or something that maybe is debatable and I'll go along with it if we sunset.
Right, let's see how this works for 2 years. Review, exactly.
Well, I'll go a little further. It's only one council member. It only takes one council member to put something on a discussion only agenda. So not this week, but our next discussion only agenda, can we put on a discussion of this section of the charter as to how we might try to implement a regular review of
In January 14th.
January would be it.
Put it in the ballot.
Right, right. But they had such a big discussion about if we sunset, this might be valuable. All right, okay, so we have one more here, which is 7.6, that we were going to talk about. And then-
Do 6.8 or?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think that's the one I was going to. So I'm sorry, I read Marie's thing, but I didn't look at Asia. Was Marie's, and Jeff's email in our communication packet this time or not? You all saw that?
Well, I emailed you. I don't think Marie emailed just you and I. I don't think that was in. That was last week.
Okay, so that will be in the next packet, which talked about, Marie was letting us know she was looking at, something on, the petitions and talking with you, and so we could probably explain it better.
I think she might have been a little confused because she was referring to charter amendments, which are under state law anyway. It's dictated how that standard is. So her question was, to clarify how she determines the number of voters, which under state laws that qualify for the files, which is 5% of the last number of voters in the last gubernatorial election. Charter. So this section 6.8 is different. This is for enacting initiatory petition for a referendum petition. Terms get mixed up a lot, but an initiatory petition is to enact an ordinance. A referendum petition is to repeal ordinance. Which this is an impossible provision. I maybe shouldn't say impossible, but it's never been done. He's told me it's never been done, maybe it happened years ago before that. Talked a little bit about this last time, the Oklahoma City Act, gives you the power to do this. Different cities, I said, different cities have different standards on it. Some of them are very, like this, probably don't get used much, others a lot easier. So sort of discussion we had last time, Mr. Meadows too, was, some things are better enacted by ordinance, not charter.
Oh, yes.
So, for lots of reasons, you have to vote on a charter amendment to change it again. And some subject matter things are better in ordinance than charter. But if you make it impossible to do an ordinance, no one's gonna do one. It's gonna figure out the charter amendment, which almost charter amendment, most things. There are some challenges, things you can't do, like money, appropriations and things, but I think we should change this to make it a little easier for citizens to at least enact an ordinance. I don't know about the referendum. That's never been done, probably because it's so difficult. So the way I read it is it's got 6 months. Signatures are good.
Well, Jeff, sorry, before you get into that, what's the standard for a charter? Because I missed last time, so
5% of voters in the last gubernatorial election.
thank you.
And you have a year to collect signatures under charter amendment. Well, you don't have like a set year, but from the date your charter amendment, signatures are good going a year back.
Okay.
They're valid.
Is this 15% etched in stone? Or-
In,
No, it is not a.
That is not a state law, that is not, that is a number that has been.
5% or more, 5% is the baseline under the home rule cities act, if I recall.
correct.
As it relates to 5% of voters that turned up at the last gubernatorial elections versus 50% of registered voters.
Yeah, this is a huge number.
Yeah.
So Reed emailed Diane and I, told me about just questions about it or whatever. I think she maybe 2 seconds, just a little bit. I don't think you need to certify what she, or clarify what, whether you just keep that or not. Good, I guess. But
She was trying to make sure she was using the right numbers when she was validating for teachers. That was the thing, and I'll give you those that email to you too, because that's when she came up with the House bill too, about the canvas election versus, what we're gonna have to face now, if you're elected after December 2024, it's the month after, so that's what I was talking about earlier. So
How
what
does,
would you propose in here, 5%?
I started, the more I thought about this, I don't know why it's not the same standard for a charter amendment. Charter amendments more, it's like changing the constitution, it's a little more important. So what happens is you just get citizens proposing ordinances, the way the charter reads now, council can adopt it, or they can just put it up to the voters, it's not, that's kind of gives options for, what can happen with it, if people put forward a bad ordinance, council doesn't have to adopt it, get paid against it or whatever.
how does this section apply, Tony, looking to you, to rental restriction overlay districts? That is an ordinance generated by a petition of residents. What's the threshold that they have to get from residents?
Overlay, I understand.
But it should.
That's a different animal.
It's an initiative unique because it relates to a 2/3 of the residents in.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit.
Because it's under the zoning.
Yeah.
But that's an ordinance.
Correct.
Someone could enact an overlay ordinance under this section if they want. That doesn't change the standard for within the current overlay ordinance. That's what you're asking about.
The question is the alignment. Because they do it by ordinance to that and wonder how many signatures required of that versus this process. I get it as it relates to the city as a whole versus a certain residential. Okay.
But, I think what Jeff's saying is that, and I think that's what we saw last year, or earlier this year, which is that there is a bias towards changing the charter rather than just putting in an ordinance before the people or a change in an ordinance. And, you know, that's just not what I think is, good government for one thing. And so the argument that was made during the election that said, this should really be in an ordinance. I think even the proponents said, yeah, that's right, but we can't get a change without making it a ballot proposal. Because there we get 5% of the voters who voted in the last election, rather as opposed to 15% of the registered voters that are still showing up, I think, on QBF, which could be people who are maybe not even living here anymore. So I think a change here because we're not required to have this 15% of our registered voters as the standard, that we need to look at how we can change that to make that the more attractive way of making change in the city by citizens passing around petitions. We don't want to eliminate initiative and referendum because that's a power of the citizen to control government. But I think it can be done a better way. So I hope the discussion here is what is the right percentage? Maybe it is 5%.
Is it the registered electors who voted in the last election versus those
So
other?
the charter amendment,
The same as the charter amendment.
you have to be a registered voter to vote in election or to count. The last gubernatorial election sort of resets every 4 years.
All right, so
And if we did that, at least we have a good argument that why don't we just change the ordinance as opposed to wanting to change the charter?
So if you change 6.8 to 5% registered registered, I think the state used the term qualified elector or shared qualified electors in the city. Charter amendment, you get a year. I think, I'm not even sure if that's clear. You might even have longer than that. I thought you have at least a year. Give people a year, they're more likely to come. It's all look at this, if you haven't done this, I think that's new, but it's actually really hard to do. So if you track just charter, then these people would be on the same thing, equal playing field.
Yeah, and I think that 5% of the people who voted in the last gubernatorial election or whatever it is part of the Home Rule Cities Act. So you could, I think, just say in accordance with the Home Rule Cities Act and be done.
Oh, that's limited to, I'm gonna have to kind of use that language, that's what I'll do under 117.21, but it's limited to charter changes rather than ordinances, so we can't just reference it directly because it doesn't provide a section or a process to amend ordinances. I was trying to see the note that brought up about the validity of the.
Yeah, it's not considered to the election code.
Proposing that we just track those track that language, Jeffrey.
That would just make the same as charter amendment.
You know, I think initiative and referendum is a permissible provision in the charter under the Home Rule Cities Act. So I think there is a standard there somewhere.
It isn't, well, last meeting I gave the counterpart sites, I don't have it. It's the minimum of 5% mark is what it says. City Act.
all right, so I think nobody has a problem with kind of moving in that direction. It's a lot of sense to have the ordinance easier than.
I had a question. If anyone really thought about this, yeah, just to make sure I would understand this. So you have that time to do a referendum petition to. But the only time a referendum petition suspends an ordinance is if it's within 30 days of the passage. Not if you try to repeal something 2 years after it's passed or 10 years after it's passed.
Well, you could do an initiative then with some sort of language, but
I just want to make sure that was how that was true. Because I was reading that earlier and thinking, I was like, that's really hard to do something in 30 days. I don't know.
That's only to suspend it so that it never gets action subsequent to that, like any any repeal is in fact an amendment, and so it'll be done by them. But I'll draft some changes to 6.8 to be consistent.
One other thing on that, so. Can't remember what city it was, it was in my email today. Wanted to, I think Mount Pleasant said the clerk would provide petition form. Just as always a huge issue, but all litigation happens over petition. So maybe worth saying something like that. Where if the clerk provides petition form, or the clerk approves the petition. If you have the, like at the state level, you have the option to get a petition approved by the board. And if they give their approval on the form, it can be challenged going later. Something like that in there, that just resolves a lot of problems.
Are you referencing on the suspension of the ordinance to do that,
No,
or just in general?
I think it would be in 6.8, but for the example of Mount Pleasant, the clerk would give you the form. Otherwise, when you get people doing these formats of petitions, they're not adequately formatted, and then the city clerk says, sorry. And all the residents are like, what will we submit? And then they sue, and there's battle. Just avoid it, either the clerk approves the form ahead of time or provides it. Maybe the approval makes more sense to provide it.
Yeah, it's hard to provide it because there's a lot of unique pieces to it, but I do have a provision in the Romulus charter that does require higher approval, which does prohibit a challenge based on solely as form, which is routinely the basis to challenge.
Maybe you don't have to require approval, but you can give the option that it's the challenge. Some people don't like having required, or refuse to require something. Or
they might not to know about it. Or,
yeah.
So like you give the clerk 30 days to either approve, to approve it, and if no action is taken during those 30 days, then it inflates future challenge.
That's good, yeah. Yeah. Like at the state level, you don't have to get your petition approved by the first day. But do, then it just protects you from a challenge on it.
maybe you send me that MCL. That we probably track that language as well.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Hey, Tony, MCL 117.25, is that a general initiative petition or a petition directed specifically at the charter?
Charters, I think 117.25 is charter.
Okay,
That's where it says the 5%.
that requires the 5% of the registered electors living in the city.
Not the gubernatorial. Okay.
Okay, so we have 7.6 left on here, and then we have the rest of 7. Do we want to stop now and start with the city attorney fresh next time? If we hold- Because part of me wants to, you're going to bring us, Robert, going to bring us the ethics ordinance, so we have that. You're going to send that out to us, so we have that before our discussion, so that we could do the whole city attorney one next time. And then Tony will have chapter 8, and on our list, the chapter 8, which is where all the materials located.
Just ask Tony one question before we go. Are you considered an administrative officer and any other things you do?
Yeah, I think.
So I'll say anything about to ruminate on for next meeting before we go here as to your thoughts on that. Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it holds me to a higher standard or provides more authority of counsel to ask questions of me. It's solely by contract. I think that might be limited. If my relation with them is solely by contract. I mean,
And the way the charter is worded, I think says that we may make it by contract, hire a city attorney and a city manager who shall be administrator legislator.
yeah, it makes that distinction for sure. And I think that just provides that subject, the subjectivity to the board office.
And just one more thing about it after Mark brought up the misconduct not his state felony. I don't think that the city can make something account. Well, I know the city can't make something account. So that would just be, going to the incongruity of the penalties there, I think that it's not made a felony based on that.
No, but they could be referred to the president.
Me, we could have, yeah, maybe.
If they make it, they would be prosecuted.
Okay, so I have on our agenda for next. I have to go back over 3.6 and 4.8 because of the clerk's email, which we'll send out to you. 4.9, 6.5, 6, 6.8, 6.11, 7.2, 7.4, 7.6, 8, and we'll start on chapter 10. So we're just one meeting behind here.
You mean chapter 7? It's the 10.
Chapter 10 is what's on our agenda.
Oh, gotcha.
This 8 and 9. 9 is empty, 8 is going to be our new, and we're almost finished with chapter 7. Let's do 7. All right. Good luck, everybody. Moved by Professor Secretary Tap, all in favor, say aye. Opposing sign.